Alright, so this section is on 9.3, solving quadratic equations using square roots. We can use this method when we only have a quadratic equation, ax squared plus c. There is no middle term, there is no bx. It's just the x with the exponent of 2, and then any regular numbers with no variable. Alright, so the core concept here is that when x squared equals d, if d is positive, if d is greater than 0, then there's going to be two real solutions, both the positive and negative square root of d. When d equals 0, then it has one solution, x is 0. And if it's negative, it has no real solutions. We can't have the square root of a negative for it to be real. Alright, so we're going to solve each equation using square roots. Equation 1, we have 3x squared minus 27 equals 0. Just like when we're solving for variables way back in chapters 1 and 2, we are going to get the variable by itself. So first step is to add 27 to both sides. After I add 27 to both sides, I have 3x squared equals 27. To get x by itself, the next step is to divide by 3. So divide both sides by 3, and I have x squared equals 9. 27 divided by 3 is 9. And now if x squared is 9, then x is the square root of 9. So x is the square root of 9, which is going to be positive or negative 3. 9 is positive, 9 is greater than 0, so x has two real solutions, both positive 3 and negative 3. Alright, and looking at example B, to get x by itself, we're going to start by adding 10 to both sides. And then we have x squared equals negative 10 plus 10 is 0. Well, if x squared is 0, then x equals the square root of 0, and there only is one real solution. X is 0. And lastly, example C, to get x by itself, we're going to start by subtracting 11. So then these cancel out. We have negative 5x squared equals 16 minus 11 is 5. Then we need to divide by negative 5. So I have x squared equals 5 divided by negative 5 is negative 1. And it's at this point that we know that there's no real solutions, but because we can't have the square root of negative 1. It's not a real number. So we say no real solutions. Square root of a negative is not real. In example 2, we are still solving equations using square roots, except instead of just the variable squared, now we have x minus 1 squared. So now we have x minus 1 equals the square root of 25. And now we know the square root of 25 is positive or negative 5, which means this is actually going to be two equations because it's two real solutions. So x minus 1 equals positive 5, or x minus 1 equals negative 5. Alright, and then we solve it the same way we would another equation, so add 1 to both sides, and x equals 6, or x equals negative 4. Should be a plus 1 over here. Alright, in example B, before we deal with the square root, we have to remember that when we're solving for a variable, it's like we're using GEMDAs backwards. So before I deal with that exponent or that grouping symbol, I have to undo first addition and subtraction, but it's in the grouping symbol, so can't do that. And then the multiplication and division. So before I deal with the exponent, I need to divide both sides by 4. So now I have x minus 3 squared equals 9 over 4. Now it's the grouping symbol with the exponent, so now I can get rid of the exponent. I'm going to have x minus 3 over here. And the square root of 9 over 4, if you remember our 9-1 notes, can't leave that square root with a fraction in it, so we're going to simplify that to square root of 9 over square root of 4. Square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2, so this is going to be positive negative 3/2. And now I have x minus 3 equals positive or negative 3/2, which we're actually going to write as 1.5. It'll make our lives a little bit easier. So now I have two equations, if x minus 3 is positive 1.5, or if x minus 3 is negative 1.5. To solve for x, we add 3 to both sides. We have x equals 4.5, or x equals positive 1.5. Notice our directions for example 3. Instead of leaving it as a square root, now it says round solutions to the nearest hundredth. So we're going to get our square root, our positive, negative, and then we're going to enter it into a calculator and round it to the nearest hundredth. So to get x by itself in part A, we're going to start by adding 13 to both sides. We're using GEMDAs backwards. Cancels out over here. I have 4x squared equals 15 plus 13 is 28. Now I need to undo the multiplication. To do that, I use the inverse operation of division. 4's cancel out. I have x squared equals 28 divided by 4 is 7, which means that x equals the positive or negative square root of 7, which if we type into our calculator and round to the nearest hundredth, we're going to get about 2.65, which means x is positive or negative 2 65 hundredths. All right, example B, we're going to start by adding 30 to both sides. We have to undo addition or subtraction first. So then I have 3x squared left over here. 30's cancel out. 4 plus 30 is 34. Then I need to undo the multiplication by dividing by 3. And I have x squared is equal to 11 1/3. If we're writing that as a decimal, it's 11.3 repeating, which means x is going to be the square root of 11.3 repeating. And if we enter that into our calculators, we get x equals positive or negative 3.37. X is positive or negative 3 37 hundredths. Example 4, problem solving. A touch tank has a height of 3 feet. Its length is 3 times its width. So we're going to start by writing that down. Length equals 3 times width. The volume of the tank, so I know volume is length times width times height. Volume of the tank is also equal to 270 cubic feet. Find the length and width of the tank. Okay, so it gives us the height is 3. So I know I can already plug in one of those 3 variables. Height is 3. I'm going to use width. And then because I know what length is in regards to width, I'm going to plug in 3 times w for length. So this is times 3w. And I'm going to simplify that a little bit. 270 equals, I can combine these. 3 times 3 is 9. I can also combine these. W times w is w squared. Now I want to get w by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 9, and I get 30 equals w squared, which means w equals the square root of 30, which is about 4.58. We're not going to worry about making it positive or negative because we can't have a negative measurement. All right, so I know width is 4.58 feet, which means now I can solve for length. Length was 3 times width, and if I do 3 times 4.58, I get 13.74 feet. So our width is 4.58 feet, and our length is 13.74 feet. All right, thanks for tuning into the notes for today. Some summary questions for you. When you are given the quadratic equation y equals ax squared plus c, meaning there is no b term, there's no middle term, how do you determine the number of solutions? Well, in this case, we can solve it the same way we would any variable, and the goal is to get x squared equals a number, so that then we have x equals the positive or negative square root of that number. If that number is positive, then x has 2 solutions. If that number is 0, x has 1 solution, it is 0. And if it's negative, there are no real solutions.